Hey buddies, it's Mr. Puggy here, Common Asher, another Wonderlands build. Today I want to finally talk about the build I made quite a while ago. I made a sneak peek of it. I named it Corrupted Angles. I'm not sure if it's going to still be named that when I uploaded this video. I wasn't 100% sold on the name, but the important part is the amount of damage that we're able to deal with Play the Angles while also using Corrupted Plate Mail, because if you guys aren't familiar, the Corrupted Plate Mail allows Play the Angles to proc 2 times, which is very, very nasty, and allows you to dish out lots and lots of Play the Angles damage, allowing you to cheese damage very, very easily, as you guys saw in the clip earlier. Because we're using Corrupted Plate Mail, we're also going to be using Contagion as well to allow ourselves to deal large amounts of damage. But before I get more in depth of the meat and potatoes of this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and follow me on Twitch on the top right. You have no idea how much helps me out. And let's get into the video.
Legendary? Whoa! No way, dude!
First things first, as in tradition, let's talk about the skill tree. Now, I'm going to briefly go over the Spore Warden skill tree because you guys are already familiar with what makes the Spore Warden build good. I'm using Eagle Eye for gun damage, Affinity for Play the Angles damage, Bullseye for more crits. This got buffed recently, so it is a little bit nicer, but you know, I'm mainly using it as filler still because I don't think it's that great still. 2 out of 3 Quiver of Holding, the Revive Pet ability, Wind Runner, which is always good, and Wrath of Nature as well as Headhunter, and finally Play the Angles. Now, Wrath of Nature was nerfed. It did take kind of a significant nerf in most people's eyes, but I do want to stress this for you guys who are playing Spore Warden, and I've had a lot of people say like, oh, my Spore Warden's bad. Like this Wrath of Nature nerf has made my Spore Warden just not good anymore. Now, normally you're around 100 damage increase, and now we're around 60% when we have 6 out of 3 on Wrath of Nature. But don't think it's the end of the world. You're still able to deal lots of damage with Wrath of Nature. It's still one of the more important multipliers or powerful multipliers in the Spore Warden tree, or multipliers in general, and it still allows you to dish out a ton of damage to Spore Warden. So don't downplay the skill now that it was nerfed. It's really good still. I don't think there's a single build that I made with Spore Warden that is worse now due to the nerf. It's still able to clear all content with ease. So don't think this Wrath of Nature nerf is going to make or break your build, because it's still good, guys. Let's go over the Stabbomancer tree. Now, I'm going 5 out of 5 on Potes and Potions, 3 out of 3 on Exploit Their Weaknesses, 5 out of 5 on Swift Death, and 2 out of 5 on Arsenal. Now, you might be wondering, why do I have 5 out of 5 Swift Death when we're not doing a speed build? Arsenal, this could be for a completely different video, but to summarize it, Arsenal doesn't give you as much damage multipliers as you would think. We can easily get guns, melee, and spell with a lot of different points in different skill trees or different perks like enchantments and everything like that. It's not as valuable as a skill. Swift Death allows you to get all damage dealt, which is very, very valuable, especially with this build, because we don't have a lot of all damage dealt on this build. And since we're going to be moving at all times, we're going to see a significant increase in DPS as opposed to putting 5 out of 5 on Arsenal. Perhaps I'll go more in depth on why this is, but basically it's a different multiplier. It's multiplicative to gun damage and spells and melee because it's all damage dealt, so it's a lot more valuable to get than Arsenal. And then finally we have 3 out of 3 on Contagion. Now this is also 6 out of 3 with a certain armor piece that we are using, and I swap in between the 2 armor pieces, and I'll explain a little bit in a few moments once we go over to our gear, which is the next topic. Now there's 3 weapons I like to use on this particular setup. I like to use the Ruby Spite because the Ruby Spite is really, really nasty. It has that 200% increase in damage when you just go into the alt fire mode, which is ridiculous. So it's really good on any build. Preferably I would want all damage dealt on my enchantment like I have with my other 2 weapons here, but I don't quite have that. But it's not one of the weapons I 100% focus on, because the 2 weapons I like to focus on is the Cryo Nightshade. If you guys aren't familiar, the Cryo Nightshade is my baby. I love the Cryo Nightshade so much. It's the best SMG in my opinion in the entire game, unless you are doing melee, then it's like Livewire. But this is a beast all around with most builds, and is one of the 2 sides of the coins I like to use on this build, and I'll explain why I'm saying that in a few moments. Next, I have a Primordial Ludite. Now, a Ludite is a very powerful Torg pistol that has obviously impact and sticky. Now, the impact mode I like to use for mobbing, while sticky is for bossing for obvious reasons, but pretty much if you guys aren't familiar with the reasoning on that, it's because stickies can apply a significant amount of damage multipliers on the target that it's stuck to. That's why we go to sticky mode when we fight bosses. I primarily like to use impact mode because it allows me to apply dots very, very easily to multiple targets. And if we apply multiple dots to multiple targets easier, we're going to see a lot of contagion loops potentially, which is excellent. Next, we have Goblin Pickaxe. Now the Goblin Pickaxe increases our movement speed, spell cooldown, and action skill cooldown. Now, like a lot of builds in Wonderlands, we are trying to optimize our burst window, which is From the Shadows and Buffmeister. So these two cooldown rates is very, very good on any build, and movement speed helps increase our damage with Dreadwind. The important enchantment here is while action skill is active, increase elemental damage by 35% because we're trying to optimize our From the Shadows usage. So we're going to preferably go into our burst window as often as possible and stay in there as long as possible. Next two rings I have here are going to be a Primordial Mood Ring, gun damage. They are both identical because you can easily duplicate items if you put them into a bank and then grab them back out after reloading your save, and they have pistol critical hit damage, which allows us to deal large amounts of damage with loot dite. Now, even without the crit damage, we're still able to deal large amounts of damage even without that. So don't think that just because we have pretty much a god roll on this, it doesn't necessarily make or break our build. We're still able to deal large amounts of damage even without this. For example, the clips I was using with my Nightshade, I didn't swap over to any SMG critical hit damage rings, so we were able to deal large amounts of damage with the Nightshade even without that crit multiplier, so it's not essential to the build. You just want to try to look out for mood rings. Now, I know once again I'm going on a tangent based on recent hotfixes, and a lot of people think mood rings aren't necessarily the best anymore. Now, obviously, it's not as good as it used to be, but it is still a very easy conditional ring to have active almost 100% of the time, which means we're going to get the 33% increase in damage or the other secondary stats very, very easily. And a lot of the other rings are around 33%, so it's might as well use the easiest to activate ring since all of them are around the same power level now. Next, we are using a Body Rune. This is the Contagion build, so of course we want to use multiple elements. So Body Rune applies fire to our build, which is always really, really good. It also has a hidden effect that increases our gun damage by a little bit that is not listed on the card itself, which is really nice. Not really sure why it has a hidden effect, but it allows us to deal large amounts of damage with gun damage. Next, we have the enchantment while action skill is active, increase frost damage by 50%. Most of our weapons are frost, which means we're going to deal a lot of damage with this enchantment, and we're able to use it because we have From the Shadows. Since it's a duration-based action skill, we can of course use these enchantments. Next, we have a Sacrificial Skeep. Sacrificial Skeep allows us to have large amounts of survivability on any build you put it on, but the important part is it has Stabbomancer power with status effect damage. Now, status effect damage is essential to allow our contagion loop to happen. You need around 20 to 25% baseline on a amulet to allow you to get the contagion loop. The more status effect damage on your build, the better. Now, ideally, I would want the dark magic damage to be frost damage because, you know, we're primarily using these, but it does help our corrupted plate mail just a tiny bit, but not as much as it would be if it was frost damage. And then finally, we have a triggering Buffmeister with Kachow and Pew. Now, the important part is getting these two because the Kachow is going to increase our ability damage by a significant amount, which is important because it's going to increase our play to angles damage because that's kind of what we're going for at all times, and allowing us to shoot faster and reload faster with Pew. Now, this is act skill start, increase gun damage by 40% for 10 seconds. And it being shock is really important. You could have shock or poison. The reason why we have shock is because we have poison on our melee weapon, so we don't necessarily need that. But basically, we are covering all the other elements with this build except for shock, which is why we're going with a shock Buffmeister to allow us to have all the elements on this particular build. Of course, you could use a shock Goblin Pickaxe and then use a poison Buffmeister. It doesn't really matter as long as you're covering your weakness or the one element you don't have. That's the important part. And finally, let's talk about the corrupted plate mail. I use two different corrupted plate mails on this build. I use one for primarily focusing on the Nightshade and one primarily focusing on the loot dite. And what I mean by that is that the corrupted plate mail over here, it has 3 out of 3 on Wrath of Nature. Now, the Wrath of Nature is going to obviously apply when we hit with our play to angles. Now, we're going to see lots of different play to angles, obviously, on all the weapons we use because we have double proc with the corrupted plate mail. but the Nightshade is able to get play the angles to proc even more often due to the fact that it shoots multiple projectiles, which means we're going to get the debuff to happen really, really quickly. Now, one could argue that you could still use Contagion with a Nightshade. Obviously, that is true. That is something that we'll use on our build, but we want to deal the most amount of initial hit damage to deal the most amount of damage with our Contagion loop, and the Nightshade doesn't allow that as effectively as the Loot Dite. So when I switch over to the Loot Dite, I like to primarily use this Corrupted Plate Mail because it gives us 3 out of 3 on Contagion, which means we're going to deal large amounts of damage with obviously the Contagion loop and higher chances to actually apply the Contagion loop. Loot Dite has high initial hit damage, which means we're going to see a large amount of damage from the Contagion, as well as having a conditional increase baseline on itself, which allows us to loop the Contagion better than others. I explained this a little bit better on my previous Contagion build, so if you're confused on what I mean by conditional damage increases being important on a Contagion build, please look at the video on the top right for the explanation on what I mean on that. There's going to be timestamps on the video on the top right in the description if you want to skip over to the build showcase, which will explain what I mean. Besides allowing us to double proc play the angles, it does allow us to get Dark Magic on this build, which allows Contagion to obviously get another chance to proc its loop, which is always excellent. And perhaps if you're confused on what I mean right now on switching between the two, I'll explain it a little bit when we go to the build showcase, but let's go over our myth ranks. This is going to be my Druid, this is going to be my Archmage, this is going to be my Blade Master, and this is going to be Deadeye. And then finally, let's look over at our hero stats. We have max strength, max wisdom for Contagion, as well as mid-level intelligence because the Buffmeister needs to come back as soon as possible. We already have some aspects on this build that allows our action skill to come back quicker than our spells, so that's why intelligence is midway as opposed to attunement. Oh, and I forgot to mention our Sacrificial Skeep has Stabbomancer power, which allows our From the Shadows to last longer, which is very, very important. Now I'm going to go into the field and show a general showcase on how this build works, but we're going to use our 3 out of 3 Corrupted Plate Mail on Contagion with the Loot Dite first, so you're not confused on what I'm going to show at the current moment, and we can kind of go over why the 3 out of 3 Contagion on the armor piece is better overall with this particular weapon. All right, so first things first, here's some enemies. We can go into our burst window and just eliminate all the small fries very easily. I'm going to be using impact mode because it allows us to hit lots of targets very, very easily and not allowing us to strictly aim or I should say have to aim very well, which is, you know, the type of playstyle I like. Sticky mode obviously is better for single target damage. As you see right here, this enemy is going to be cleared a lot quicker when I go into my sticky mode because, you know, it's more focused on dealing single target damage because of the sticky multiplier. But I do primarily like to keep myself on the impact mode itself because we're going to see the gun is able to hit lots of different targets very easily. Now, we're not getting any clumped up targets on this particular arena, which is a bit of a bad showcase on what I mean on why the impact mode is better, but it really just allows us to deal large amounts of damage without having to aim very hard because lots of mobs are really just smaller targets that move really fast, which allows us to use impact mode to our advantage on this particular build, or I guess you could say with any build. And you might have saw a couple times when I was shooting these enemies, they were dying very quickly without me really shooting them, and that's because they were getting the Contagion loop, allowing them to get a huge dot on them, making them die very quickly. Now, our Goblin Pickaxe does have Echo, which means after we deal a significant amount of damage, we can go in for the kill with a melee, which I think I might have shown on my Parasite kill earlier at the beginning of this video, but I'll show right here. After we deal a large amount of damage, we can go in for the kill with that melee right there on that Cursed Crab, allowing us to kill the enemy very, very easily. Now, here's a bunch of enemies right here. I'm going to show why the impact mode is so powerful with a bunched up enemies like this. I'm going to just shoot it. We're going to hit a couple enemies right here, and because we're shooting so many different elements on these targets, we're going to see them die very quickly. We cleared this encounter in just a couple of seconds without me really going anywhere across the map because the Contagion was able to spread so quickly due to the fact that we were hitting that clumped up target, which meant they were ricocheting, you could say, the dots between themselves very, very easily. Now keep in mind, the other side of this build is using Play the Angles to deal a nasty amount of damage. We technically are doing a super cheese build because we're cheesing damage with Play the Angles and cheesing damage with Contagion, allowing us to get a powerful combination of effects, allowing us to clear most encounters very easily. But the Play the Angle side is obviously going to be more easy to see if I swap over to my Nightshade and if I swap over to my Wrath of Nature corrupted plate mail, as you see right here. Now of course I could still use my Contagion corrupted plate mail and still deal large amounts of damage, but as I said, to Adnesium, Wrath of Nature being able to apply targets is very valuable, and the Nightshade is able to apply those very easily because it shoots so many projectiles. You might notice as I shoot these targets that are upcoming, you're going to see dark magic trails come off of them. That's because the corrupted plate mail is making the Play the Angles proc on the dark magic shot as well, which means you're going to see not only cryo trails, which is the normal thing you would see on a cryo Nightshade, but also dark magic trails, because as I said before, the dark magic damage is able to proc the Play the Angles, which means we're going to see large amounts of damage. Now I shot that target and the target next to him died very quickly due to the fact that we were hitting him with the Play the Angles from the target next to him, which was a great example on why Play the Angles is so powerful on this particular weapon. Even without my burst windows, I'm able to clear most targets just because of how powerful the Cryo Nightshade is baseline, but we are optimizing frost damage very well, allowing us to clear targets very easily with these two different cross weapons. Now I could continue to use the Nightshade, but you guys are already familiar how powerful the Nightshade is on a Play the Angles build, so let's go back over to the Loot Dite because that is not a weapon I commonly use, which means we're going to swap over back to our Corrupted Plate Mail with Contagion. Now this encounter will allow us to see the true power of Contagion with this weapon because we're going to see lots of grouped up targets, which means they're going to get the Contagion loop to occur very, very easily. As you saw there, a couple enemies spawn and they're dying very quickly without me having to do much else besides shoot a couple of times, which is excellent. Now the boss is going to spawn. I'm going to just shoot him with impact mode. Now I could have swapped over to sticky mode and probably dealt a little bit more damage than I did right there, but I already knew that there was a couple targets next to the enemy, so if I was able to apply the dots on multiple targets, where I'm more than likely going to see the loop happen, which is really the same reason why we use so many different elements on a Contagion build, because we get more chances at the loop. Now I know this video might have been a bit long-winded, but there was a lot of different things I had to explain on this build on why it clicks very well, because I feel like there's a bit more happening on this build than most builds that I do, but hopefully I was able to explain it well. If you guys have any questions on this build, please comment it down below. If there's anything I missed in particular that you're confused on, I will have no problems answering it. But as always, a big shout out to the members who make these videos possible. We got Jason Noodles, Clairvoyance, Rick Inglesias, Josh Dig, 31bar70, Grey Wolf, Wish Keeper, and Super Noob. These are the people who support me as little as $5 a month, and you can also support me as little as $5 a month by clicking the link in the comment description or in the top right to become a member. The more members we have, the closer I get to becoming full-time, which means more videos for you guys. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.
And the last shall be first to immerse in a pass out heat, facing him out with a moxie melt till he woke up drowning in tchotchke hell. War in a cave with a torch on a wall, then a window arrangement of porcelain dolls.